You think you know Jack and Jill, two children, a hill, a pail of water, a tumble. But the nursery rhyme you've been taught is a sanitized version that's hidden its true meaning for centuries. The original wasn't written for children. It was written to disguise truths so dangerous that speaking them openly could get you in trouble. Today, we're uncovering the disturbing origins buried in these 4 simple lines. A coded message about political rebellion, cosmic imprisonment, and a real tragedy that left its mark on an entire English village. And here's what will haunt you. Once you learn why the earliest illustration showed 2 boys instead of a boy and girl, once you understand what breaking his crown really meant in the 17th century England, you'll realise this was never about fetching water. It was about encoding horrors too terrible to speak aloud. All right, let's uncover the truth. The truth about Jack and Jill starts with a startling discovery in the earliest known printing from 1765. The woodcut illustration accompanying John Newbery's Mother Goose's Melody doesn't show a boy and a girl at all. It depicts 2 boys standing at the foot of the hill. The crude block print renders them stiff and awkward, their features nothing more than scratches of ink against rough paper. The hill itself looms disproportionately large behind them, less a gentle slope than a threatening mountain that seems ready to swallow these tiny figures whole. No pail visible in their hands, no maternal figure watching over them, just 2 boys frozen in what looks like dread rather than anticipation. To an 18th century parent flipping through this book by candlelight, expecting nursery comfort, this image would have been deeply unsettling. The boys don't look like they're about to fetch water, they look like they're about to face judgment. Even stranger, the female character wasn't originally named Jill, but Gil, and linguistic analysis of the rhyme structure, particularly how water rhymes with after, reveals something far more unsettling. This rhyme was already ancient by the time it was first printed, with roots stretching back into the 1600s and possibly beyond. But the grim little woodcut was only the beginning. To understand why Jack and Jill carried such weight, we have to step back even further, into a world where nursery rhymes weren't childish jingles, but masks worn by entire societies. The names Jack and Jill weren't random choices or cute character names. By the Middle Ages, these had become the John and Jane Doe of English folklore, blank slates onto which any tragedy, any scandal, any forbidden truth could be projected. The pairing itself was so established that a comedy act called Jack and Jill was performed at the Elizabethan court as early as 1567. Picture the torchlit Great Hall of Elizabeth I's court, where nobles in jewelled doublets and silk gowns gathered for the evening's entertainment. The performers tumble onto the makeshift stage, not telling a children's story, but acting out bawdy, physical comedy filled with crude jokes about drink and intimacy. Jack stumbles drunkenly, while Jill makes obscene gestures that send the courtiers into fits of laughter. This was comedy that walked the razor's edge, letting the nobility snicker at authority while pretending it was all harmless fun. The Queen herself might have smiled behind her fan as the actors mocked the very social order she embodied. These weren't innocent children fetching water. They were archetypal fools whose falls and fumbles let everyone laugh at truths too dangerous to speak aloud. But the darkest and strangest origin traces back to 13th century Iceland, to a story preserved in the prose Edda about 2 children named Yuki and Bill. According to the prose Edda, the siblings were performing the innocent task of fetching water from a well called Birgir when the moon god Mani observed them from the heavens. On that bitter northern night, with their breath forming ice crystals in the air, the children bent over the well's edge, carefully lowering their bucket, called Saiga, on its pole, called Simul. The moon hung unusually bright above them, casting shadows so sharp they looked carved from obsidian. Then something changed. The moonlight began to pulse, growing stronger until it hurt to look at. Mani descended not like a benevolent deity, but like a cosmic predator, his lunar radiance freezing the children where they stood. Their screams died in their throats as he seized them, not gently, not with divine compassion, but with the cold indifference of a god taking what belonged to him by right. In one terrible moment, he lifted them from the earth, their small hands still clutching the water pole in terror. The bucket swung wildly, spilling its contents in a silver arc that the watching villagers later swore they saw streaking across the sky. Now, the myth claims, if you look at the full moon on a clear night, you can still see them there, two small shadows against the lunar surface, forever carrying their burden, forever climbing, forever falling. Not dead, which might have been a mercy, but imprisoned in eternal servitude, transformed into a cautionary constellation about what happens when the gods notice you. The phonetic similarities are impossible to ignore. Bill becomes Jill, then Jill. Juki transforms into Jack. The simple act of fetching water remains constant across 1,000 years. This wasn't just some local English tale. It was part of a pan-European tradition of seeing imprisoned figures on the moon's surface, a shared nightmare that transcended borders and centuries. The innocent nursery rhyme suddenly becomes a warning about divine punishment, about children stolen from their families and trapped in eternal servitude. Centuries later, this ancient story of divine punishment would fade, but the rhyme itself would be reforged in England as a weapon for a much more immediate political conflict. During the tumultuous reign of King Charles I in the 1600s, the words took on a devastatingly clever double meaning that would have been immediately understood by everyone who heard them. Imagine walking into a London alehouse in 1630. A labourer slams his mug on the scarred wooden table, furious that his pint feels lighter though the price has gone up. The tavern keeper shrugs helplessly. The king has been tampering with the official measures. You have to understand that in the 17th century England, a jack wasn't just a name, it was an official liquid measure, about half a pint. A gill was a quarter pint. When Charles I attempted to levy new taxes on these standard measures to fill the crown's coffers without Parliament's consent, he was essentially trying to shrink the measures while charging the same price, a hidden tax on every drop of ale and wine consumed in the kingdom. The fury in Parliament was volcanic. Members stood in their seats, voices raised to near screaming, denouncing the king's measure tampering as not just greed, but tyranny itself. If His Majesty can shrink our jack today, one member thundered, what's to stop him from halving our bushel tomorrow, our acre the day after? The very foundation of commerce, standard, trustworthy measures, was being corrupted by royal decree. Street pamphlets began appearing with crude drawings of broken crowns and spilled pails, barely disguised attacks on the monarchy. Parliament struck down this royal decree with unprecedented force, breaking the king's authority, his crown, in a constitutional crisis that would eventually lead to civil war. The rhyme transformed into a celebration of resistance. Jack fell down and broke his crown, meant the Jack measure defeated the crown's taxation scheme, while Gill came tumbling after, described the chaos that followed when the smaller measures couldn't be standardised either. Every time someone sang this rhyme, they were secretly mocking the failed power grab of an overreaching monarchy, turning children's voices into instruments of political dissent. Yet the most visceral and disturbing interpretation emerges from the Somerset village of Kilmersdon, where locals have insisted for centuries that their hill is the hill, and that Jack and Jill were real people whose tragedy occurred around 1697. According to the persistent local legend, Jack and Jill were unmarried lovers who would steal away from the village's watchful eyes to meet on this hillside. Their clandestine encounters led to the inevitable. Jill became pregnant. But this wasn't a tale that would end in a quiet wedding and a happy family. Jack died first, and the accounts vary in their horror. Some villagers whispered that he fell from the very hill where they had met in secret on a moonless night, his lantern extinguished as he tumbled, his skull cracking like an egg on the rocks below. Others claimed he was working in the quarry when a ledge gave way, tons of limestone crushing him instantly, leaving barely enough to bury. The phrase "broke his crown" suddenly takes on a sickening reality, not a bump on the head that could be mended with vinegar and brown paper, but a fatal head injury that left his face unrecognisable, forcing them to identify him by his clothes. Jill's fate was no gentler. The women who attended her birth later spoke in hushed tones of how she screamed not just from labour pains, but from grief, calling Jack's name between contractions. The cottage filled with the metallic scent of blood as complications set in. The baby was turned wrong, the midwife's hands slippery with panic. Jill died just as dawn broke, her last breath coinciding with her child's first cry. The baby survived, a boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Here's where the story becomes even more haunting. Local records show a concentration of the surname Gilson in the area, which residents claim derives directly from Gil's son, the bastard child of the doomed couple. Generation after generation of Gilsons lived in Kilmersdon, walking past that hill every day, carrying in their very name the memory of scandal and tragedy. The hill still rises behind Kilmersdon churchyard today, steep and unforgiving, with the old quarry's jagged scars visible like wounds in the earth. On misty mornings, locals say you can almost see them, two figures meeting in secret halfway up the slope, hidden by a copse of ancient oaks. The social historian Chris Roberts takes this suggestive interpretation even further, arguing that the entire rhyme functioned as a coded moral lesson whispered to young women across England. Picture the scene in 1,000 English parlours, mothers pulling their daughters close, using the rhyme as a warning. "You see what happens to girls who go up hills with boys," they'd say, their voices dropping to whispers. "Jack broke his crown because he broke God's law first. And Jill tumbled after because no woman ever escapes the consequences of sin. The journey up the hill wasn't about water, it was about seeking privacy for forbidden intimacy. The fall wasn't about clumsiness, it was about the immediate aftermath of lost virginity." Parish preachers seized on the rhyme, transforming it into a hellfire sermon. From their pulpits, they thundered about Jack's moral crown shattering the moment he satisfied his lust, about how he ran away, as men always do, leaving Jill to tumble alone into disgrace, pregnancy, and death. Young women in the congregation would lower their eyes, understanding the coded threat. Venture up that hill, and you'll come tumbling down, abandoned and ruined. So we have a cosmic abduction, a political rebellion, a local tragedy, and a moral warning. How can all of these be true at once? The answer lies in seeing the rhyme, not as a single story, but as a palimpsest of horror, the cosmic tragedy of little ones imprisoned on the moon, the political satire of a failed taxation scheme, the local tragedy of death and childbirth, the moral warning about intimate repercussions. Each generation could hear whichever secret resonated with their own fears and experiences, all hidden beneath the innocent surface of children fetching water. Consider the word crown alone, simultaneously meaning a head that could be injured, a monarchy that could be toppled, and a liquid measure that could be corrupted. This wasn't accidental ambiguity, it was intentional concealment. The rhyme survived precisely because it could mean different things to different people while maintaining its innocent facade. The pattern of tragedy embedded in these 4 lines follows a horrifying consistency. Ascent, whether literal, social or romantic, a moment of achievement or consummation at the peak, followed by a catastrophic fall that destroys everything. Jack always falls first, whether it's the male deity claiming the children, the king's authority crumbling, or the man abandoning his pregnant lover. Jill always follows, dragged along by circumstance, pregnancy, or death. The female figure never escapes the consequences of the male figure's actions or fate. With such a heavy cargo of historical trauma, the story was bound to face efforts at reclamation. The 1765 published version tried to soften the blow with additional verses about Jack going home to mend his head with vinegar and brown paper, as if a cosmic abduction or a fatal head injury or a constitutional crisis could be fixed with home remedies. These additions feel desperate, like someone trying to convince children that the screaming they heard in the night was just the wind. But the original 4 lines remain, unchanged and unadorned, carrying their cargo of ancient trauma through the centuries. Every time you hear children singing this rhyme, remember what you're really hearing: a fossilized scream from the 13th century, a coded message of political resistance from the 17th century, a memorial to a tragic death in Somerset, and a warning about the fatal consequences of desire. The innocent act of fetching water becomes a journey into realms of divine punishment, political upheaval, and human mortality. This is the secret of Jack and Jill, not one single dark truth, but a palimpsest of horrors, each one written over the last, creating a nursery rhyme that functions as a multi-generational trauma response, a political code, and a cosmic horror story all at once. 4 lines that contain within them the entire scope of human tragedy, sung sweetly to children who will one day discover that the innocent songs of their childhood were never innocent at all.